morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Dr. Brutti, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here today and speak. I get very excited about this topic. 24 years in the Air Force, a lot of different things that I've done, and I don't know that anything was more exciting than when I got involved in the cyber world. The challenges are so complex, the opinions are so varied, the speed at which the technology changes and the challenges emerge. Very exciting. It's just a fun place to work, and I like the people. I like the technology. I bring a lot of passion to what I do. I find that the folks in this business bring a lot of passion to what they do also, and that just makes it even more fun. So what I want to do today is I want to take you on a little bit of what I would call a windshield tour. Everybody know what a windshield tour is? So when we used to have dignitaries come to a base and we wanted to show off the base, we put them in a bus, drive around the base, and point out there's a hospital, there's a library, here's their aircraft. It's a windshield tour. So in the short time I have with you today, I don't think I'm going to have the time to go into depth in a lot of the topics that I would love to talk to you about. So if during this windshield tour you see some things that, some buildings you want to stop at and spend some additional time touring, please come to me afterwards at a break, during lunch, and if you want to ask questions afterwards, that'd be great also. I'd be happy to entertain those. The topic of what I want to talk about is securing the Air Force Internet. Clearly that's not an hour-long topic. But again, I think I want to just give you kind of a touch on an application of some of what Vimo was talking about, some of the challenges that are out there, some of the things that Dr. Brutti was talking about with regards to the growth in the use of the internet in all of our core businesses. And one organization, one very, very large organization's attempt to tackle those security challenges. And clearly, being a government entity, being in the military, we have not only the same normal everyday security challenges that anyone would have, all the way from a home user to a financial business, say, but also additional concerns with regards to the types of critical information that reside in a military network that a lot of folks would very much like to get their hands on in some of the locations that we've all talked about. So we'll try to get into that and have a little fun with it. Dr. Brutti did point out one thing that I did want to say at the beginning, expand upon a little bit at the beginning. I did come into what I would say was an embattled environment. Certainly not by choice. I have no regrets that the decision was made to put me where I was. Little did I know how much fun it was going to be. But I came to the program office that Dr. Brutti talked about at Electronic Systems Center on the heels of investigations from the Department of Defense and investigations from the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, saying that things weren't being done right, that money wasn't being spent properly, that equipment was being purchased without the proper authorities, and that was the environment I was thrust into. And we were at the time involved in a number of projects, and as you said, $500 million a year, and a number of projects that were urgently needed that were on hold. And so there were a lot of challenges, both fiscally, but also just from the standpoint of in the organization itself that I walked into, which, as Dr. Lee said, it was about 400 people when I left. It was only a little over 100 people when I got there. So there was a lot of dynamics, a lot of change going on in that 2-year period, and I hope to give you kind of a feel for the scope of the challenge that we had and still have today, and the magnitude of the projects we were trying to undertake to secure a very large network. So, do I control the slides? I do. Okay, so I think I kind of gave you an idea of the agenda. I do kind of want to touch on a couple things that, again, I want to piggyback a little bit on what Vimo said and Dr. Brutti said earlier, because I think it's all it was actually a good setup in many ways. I want to talk to you a little bit about what the Air Force, and it's probably, you could assume, the rest of the DoD feels about security, how they view it. Some of the specific Air Force network security challenges, where the Air Force is trying to go with their network in order to be more efficient in their mission and also keep it secure. Define the Air Force intranet, because until just about this month, the Air Force intranet didn't really exist. It was still a goal, and it exists now. And then focus specifically on the Air Force intranet gateways, the exit and entry points into the Air Force internet that NIKSUN equipment is a very big part of. And then a little bit again on the way ahead. Where are we at now with security, and where are we going next, and how are we going to get there? So I'll touch on that as well. All right, so first of all, what is network defense? And by the way, I like to point out on Firefox and NoScript, I didn't raise my hand at the time, but I'm a NoScript user. I recognize there are risks, but I kind of like the feeling of when I go to a website, it stops first, and I have a chance to think, do I really want to do this or not? So I'm a believer in it. So what is network defense? Obviously, we've got to protect the network itself, okay, from denial and degradation and intrusion to the extent that we can, but I totally agree that that is something that you could never 100% accomplish. Protecting the host, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the programs that we have ongoing right now to protect the host from compromise infection. And you do have to worry about insiders, as Dr. Rudy said, 850,000 user network. It's a lot of insiders, and you don't often know who they are and what access levels they have, though you would like to. And protecting the application. And again, we'll get a little bit more into, I think application, interesting word to use. A lot can be ascribed to what is an application. Most importantly, as we kind of all recognize in this room today, pretty much everything is being done on the network. Everything we do is accomplished on the network. It's incredible. I think back to when I got in the Air Force 24 years ago, and I would pull off a form that was about that thick because of all the carbon paper, and make a request because there's a lot of paperwork in the military, and make a request to get paid back for some trip like this one. And I had to press really hard to make sure that I got all the way through to that 8th copy so that I would get paid, because that 8th copy was pretty important. And then you go to just a few years ago, you didn't have that carbon paper anymore, but you still had to go online, and you had to either fill out the form or download it and then write on it, and you had to still have 8 copies of it, all printed out, because everybody wanted their copy. And when I left the Air Force, there was no paper. You logged onto a website, you said, here are all my expenses, here's where I want you to send me, wire the money to when you approve it, and you're done. No paper anymore. So that's quite a journey. And that's everything we do. So there are times when we in the Air Force would sit around and talk about, and there were a few times we actually put it into practice, but very, very rarely. We said, well, what do we do if the network goes down? How do we still do all of these things? And to be honest with you, it wouldn't be a pretty picture, because those stacks of forms don't exist anymore. And there's no place to go grab them. And people would be scrambling. People would be panicking and reinventing the paper. So to me, it's just a really kind of a good emphasis about how important security of the internet is, because too much of our day-to-day business and our lives are around it today. So the standard definitions also confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Obviously, very important. Keeping pertinent data private. This important thing there is, I heard the numbers, exabytes, yes. Numbers that people are going to have to start getting their minds around. I think everybody's got gigabyte down pretty good now, but exabyte's going to take a little while to understand. But you can't keep all of that. You can't invest to keep all of that data secure. You really need to understand what is that important data. What are the crown jewels? That's what you really need to understand, because that's where you need to focus your investment. Integrity, keeping data and users safe, and then availability. And this gets back to another point that was made earlier, and that is that you're going to get attacked. People are going to get into your network, but you've got to keep functioning. You have to keep operating. A couple things at the bottom. I'll skip authenticity and non-repudiation, but now I get back down to at the bottom what it really means to the Air Force and to the DoD. Defense in depth. That's really the concept that we're trying to embrace. I'll show you a little bit later about how we're trying to attack that problem. I don't think we're attacking it fully well yet, and in areas we're well behind, and in some areas we're doing okay. But the problem is again, the technology changes so fast that as soon as you think you've got yesterday's problem figured out, you got to attack tomorrow's problem. And then mission assurance. This is the bottom line, really. It is all about mission assurance. It's about the data. It's about ensuring that you continue to operate, protect the crown jewels, fight through attacks, and survive and continue to operate. That is the mantra that's behind all of the investments that we're making in Air Force security right now. Why do we believe that security is essential to the Air Force operations? Why is it important and essential to what we call cyber dominance? In the past, you've heard terms such as air supremacy, okay? Air superiority. These are kind of fundamental Air Force doctrinal type concepts. And now you're seeing those same terms with cyber in front of them. Cyber superiority, cyber dominance. It's the same kind of mindset now that we're taking from our concept of operations in the air to operations in the cyber world. Why? Well, because Air Force networks, as I said, they first of all didn't exist when I first came into the Air Force. And when they did exist, as was mentioned earlier, the first thing was let's get the copper in the ground and let's get folks connected, and then we'll worry about what happens after that. And we didn't do a lot with it other than administrative functions. And comm. Comm was the main thing that the Air Force did with it initially. But now, in all seriousness, and I just gave you an example, nearly every critical support function relies on the network. And I gave you the example of being paid for expenses. There is nothing that is not on the internet from a support function. If we have to get critical parts overseas to an aircraft, can't do it today without the network. Can, but it takes a lot longer, and you potentially impact operations, lose lives, miss opportunities to achieve effects on the battlefield. Airlift. One of the Air Force's prime missions is getting people and equipment around the globe. It's all done through the network. Where are the aircraft? Where are they going next? Who's on the aircraft? How much fuel does it need? Who's going to refuel the aircraft? All done on the network. But even more than that, just the support function is one thing, but the actual mission, the achieving effects on the battlefield are happening on the network. The core Air Force operations, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Some examples. We're very concerned in the Air Force about things like, because everything happens so fast now, okay? It's not like World War II operations or Korea operations or Vietnam operations for that matter. Targets are fleeting. You may have a very small window of opportunity to achieve some effect on the battlefield. If you don't have the intelligence that you need immediately at hand, if you don't have the command and control in place, if you don't have the decision-making authorities with that information in their hands, you miss. And in the Gulf War, we saw where the state of our abilities to operate in the cyberspace, if you will, were very limited. And I operated AWACS at a time as an air battle manager, and I saw how much autonomy I had to have in the battlefield with the aircraft that were flying over Iraq at the time, because the only link I had back, I had a data link and I had a SATCOM link back to a command and control agency. And even with that, they did not have a full understanding of what was going on right underneath our aircraft. And decisions had to be made by a person with the information they had on scene. And you flash forward today and you look at operations like the one that recently happened that ended in the termination of Mr. bin Laden's life, and that all happened on the network. That happened because of the network. And the operations that are going on over in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I was over there just a few years ago in Baghdad with multinational Corps Iraq, I was buying all of the ISR equipment that was used during that operation, and to see it operating firsthand. And it was sobering. It was sobering to know that you could be sitting in a former Saddam palace and looking at video that was coming from a dirigible floating over the city, passing that information real time back, and somebody looking at it, a perpetrator who had just put an IED down, following them from where they put it down back to wherever they go. It's pretty amazing, but you cannot do those things. You cannot achieve those effects on the battlefield without the network. So it's essential to Air Force operations. And it goes further than just the descriptions I gave. And it's for what I was doing in the Air Force, I was focusing, you'll see in a moment, on primarily that fiber and copper, and also the operations and defense of a terrestrial network. But for Air Force operations, it's the terrestrial network, and it's the airborne networks, and it's the space networks all fused together. And all of those networks are under attack. Okay, so what was the challenge that we were faced with? Again, at first, we were just putting the copper and the fiber in the ground, right? That's it with the comm links. Well, this all happened for the Air Force in a very piecemeal fashion. I'll try to use terminologies that they translate. One company, one division of the company, the Air Force, we call a major command, decided, well, I need this type of network, and they built it with the money they had. And another one said, well, I like this kind of network, and they built it. And so we had a whole bunch of data centers all over the Air Force around the globe. We had all of their own individual directory services, okay, so they didn't talk to each other either. Okay. And we command and control that from the Air Force level was almost impossible because you had to get consensus from every division. Very costly to do that. And it was really, quite frankly, done with money that you could find. Right? And what we call end of year money, end of the fiscal year. Who didn't spend their money? Well, you didn't spend your money, I'm going to go buy some routers and switches. And that's how it was built. So there was really no forethought. How are we going to sustain this network? There was no configuration management in that kind of environment. So you can see how difficult it is to defend a network that doesn't have configuration management. What is the network? If you don't know what the network is, it's hard to defend the network. We had hundreds of front doors to protect in the end. That's really the challenge. Now that is not fixed yet. It says up there previous state of the Air Force network, but I'll tell you, we're still on the path. We aren't there yet. So this is what we were trying to get to, is we were trying to get to a network that's converged, that has limited numbers of front doors. So the other challenge is what I try to do here in an unclassified fashion. All of those bars on there represent an actual piece of equipment. So I have a sensitive version of that chart that lists each of those pieces of equipment, and that's a subset. And it gives you a feel for, I think earlier, you talked about 25-year-old technology. That's getting pretty close. There's 10 to 15-year-old technology still sitting on the Air Force network. You can't defend that technology anymore. It's not defendable. So all routers, switches, servers, you name it, out there aging. Limited dollars. We're all under that same crunch of budget pressures, and the DoD is no different. Air Force is no different. And so, faced with that challenge, it's difficult to attack and fix everything, because one of the things that you have to do if you're securing a network is you don't just go and buy security products. You just don't go and buy a firewall and an IDS. You architect that network for security also. And so it would have been very expensive for us to just go attack the problem of the past. What we really needed to do is we needed to say, how do we want that network to look in the future, and then build security into that network. I had one of those company divisions, one of those Air Force divisions, a MAGCOM, come to me about a year ago, and they said, I've got a list, I've got everything that's in my network on a spreadsheet. Well, that's great. They never had that before. And I need you to replace it all. It was hundreds and hundreds of network devices. So I took that list and I gave it back to my people. I said, come back to me, take this list, and I want you to highlight every item on that list that we purchased so that we can go replace it if it needs to be replaced. Well, those hundreds and hundreds of items, there were 3 that we had purchased. I couldn't replace all those hundreds of items because they were purchased those end of year dollars. And one base, one node, one network control center said, I need to buy some stuff, and they bought it. Nobody knew they bought it, nobody knew they put it on the network. But then the survey was done, they found it all, and they said somebody helped. So that's the situation they're in. The goal, where are we trying to get to? Trying to get to One Air Force, One Network. That's that concept, One Air Force, One Network, is in official documentation that's been published by the Air Force. It's in the cyber pad, it's in the blueprint for the Air Force networks, the concept of One Air Force, One Network. The idea is to get a centrally managed network from a defensive and an operations standpoint, to get everyone into essentially one active directory forest, to take all of those company divisions, you'll see I put MAGCOM on the slide, to get all those company divisions from the 10 that were existing before down to 2, to consolidate the federations, consolidating network storage, email, and network servers. Incredible. We just surveyed just the purchases we've made alone in our program office for the Air Force, and over the last 5 years, and we found out we had purchased something like 50 petabytes of storage to about $50 million, and it was a fraction of what was on the network. We didn't know everything else until we started to pull these other MANSCOMs. And they all said, oh, yes, 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 we bought this many petabytes of storage for our needs. And we bought this. So as we look through, it's the same story that all of you have seen. Overcapacity, underutilized. An incredibly poor use of taxpayer funds. We want to ask a question?
I have this question right now, but regarding your Air Force One network, how are you working with this?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Great question. Let me get to that. I will tell you exactly how we're going to do that and where I think we're going. Not quick enough. Essentially managing network services, the core enterprise services. Again, each one of these separate MANSCOM entities operated their own core and enterprise services. Why would you do that? We had every Air Force base, well over 100, had its own help desk. How inefficient. So one of the projects that we undertook when I got to the program office was consolidating all of those help desks down to 4 and putting in infrastructure to support that. And that's operating now, and it works. And modernizing the infrastructure. Again, how do you do that? How do you modernize that infrastructure, leverage the existing investments you have, but then address the security challenges today? Because that equipment that's out there yesterday, we won't. An example I would give would be on the firewall side. We loved our firewalls. We thought they were great. They were great at handling ports and protocols. That's not the problem anymore. Applications are the problem. Right? How our firewalls do. So this is the challenge. All right, great lead in. Let's talk about DISA. So layered defense. This is kind of the way we think about it. At a strategic level, we think of the DoD, the DISA, as providing that DoD demilitarized zone. Okay. And the Defense Information Systems Agency, those who don't know what DISA is supposed to be doing that for all of the services, for all of the military. And to some extent they do. They do provide the long haul comm to the Air Force, to the Army, to the Navy, to the services. But I'll tell you, the services do not trust that DMZ. They don't trust the security. So for the Air Force, again, that slide I showed the network in the past, we had hundreds and hundreds of front doors out to the internet, hundreds of doors. And none of those relied on that strategic defense ring, and still don't. Okay. So what the Air Force decided to do is said, well, let's create an Air Force DMZ. Let's create an Air Force intranet. Okay. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about in detail in the following slides. But again, the concept was, okay, we'll take the limited amount of protection provided by the DoD DMZ at a strategic level, but we're going to create an Air Force intranet, and we're going to protect our own interests because we feel like we have a significant enough and a unique enough mission that we can do that. But we're not going to stop there. What we're going to do is we're going to take it down to a tactical level, and at every one of our, I'll use several terms here to help make them equate. At our network control centers, which exist at our bases, which are our large nodes of people, and there's about 104 Air Force bases around the globe. At each one of those places, we're going to put another DMZ in, okay? Firewalls, IDS, and proxies. And we're going to create another, to protect ourselves again as another layer, but also from the insider threat, okay? We're going to take it another layer further, and we're going to go down to the host, and we're going to put your intrusion prevention systems on the host, protect the data at rest, put in network access compliance measures so you can do identity authentication, et cetera, and role-based authentication, and you can control people's access to data, and you can control the ability of someone to attack you from inside. That's the concept. So where are we on that concept? I probably want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. I know it's an eye chart. Don't expect you to try to read and memorize it. But there's a few kind of holes I want to drill down into on this slide. So on the right, you'll see it says 850,000 plus users. And that's correct. It's a little on the low side because that's really only thinking about users on the unclassified portion of the Air Force network. And that number actually doesn't include all of the Air National Guard users of the network, but they are a part of that one Air Force and one network concept. It's essentially the same people, but there's also a classified network, okay, that you see another 100 or 200,000 or so folks that operate on in parallel with the unclassified network. So it's a large network. It's globally dispersed. It's a little different than other. It's an interesting challenge that we always had. I sit down with industry, or did, start talking in past tense, I sat down with the industry on a recurring basis to talk to them about how to secure an enterprise this large. And because one of the challenges we always found was that there were a lot of great tools out there, but not all of them scaled to an enterprise this large. Now, some that did scale to an enterprise was architected a little differently than the Air Force network is architected. So folks would come to us and say, we fielded a network for Walmart. That's a big enterprise. But they don't have local enclaves of 10, 15, 20, 25,000 users. It's a very different concept. Okay? It affects how you provision core services to that network when you have that large an enclave. If you got one user on the other side of the globe, you don't have to put the services right next to them. You've got 20,000, a little more of a challenge providing those services remotely. So this was always a problem with a network this large of finding a tool that would scale. And I will tell you that a lot of those tools that we use, because we don't, our concept in the Air Force is we don't develop these security tools. We only buy commercially available applications and hardware. So we're not going to be out in the front. We're actually going to be following industry. What works, what's been proven, okay, we'll have some of that. But then it's got to be adapted to our needs. And in almost in every case, there's had to be adaptations, configurations to handle the scale of the network. And I may talk a couple examples. 1.4 million endpoints. That number's probably a little on the low side as well. 400 plus data centers. The interesting discussion that always happens, I don't know if you follow the federal news, but Vivek Kundra, who's the CIO, DoD CIO, has these 25 points. One of them is talking about reducing the number of data centers in DoD. And I think the quote is something like 2,100 and some odd data centers. Way low. Sorry, but it's way low. You have to ask yourself, what is a data center, right? And everybody creates their own definition of what a data center is. And so I put 400 plus on there because we keep discovering more data centers. And we keep discovering a closet, and we go, what's in here? It's a data center. It's in an office building somewhere in a town. What's it supporting? You don't even know. But it's another data center. So it's a large network. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey here, and there may not be a lot of flow to it, but I'll give it a try. I'm going to start you in the bottom left where you see the big green circle, and if you can read it, you'll see base ITS, Information Transport System. Okay. So our program office, again, that $500 million a year investment, covers a pretty large gamut. So that aspect of what I'm going to talk about is really, the backbone. It's that transport layer, it's the physical layer. It is the fiber to the ground, it's the sonnet rings, it's the wireless access points, it is the in-building nodes, the transport nodes. It's all of that activity. But and we're doing that modernization at every Air Force base, 104 Air Force bases, and have been doing it for years. And you might ask yourself, why have you been doing it for years? Well, it takes about 5 or 6 months just to figure out how to modernize that network, because you've got to survey it, you've got to find out what's there, you've got to find out what has been at that base since the last time the infrastructure was put there, what's there now, because you've got to modernize that. And then you've got to design it. And each one of these bases, like I say, go from somewhere around 5,000 people to about 25,000 people. They're large, they're bases that are geographically large, they have complex environments where there are flight lines. There are environmental challenges in some of these bases, like at Vandenberg Air Force Base on the, I'll do this right. Vandenberg Air Force Base on the West Coast, where there is protected seashore. At Edwards Air Force Base in California also, which has protected species on this large base. Same thing in Florida. So there are challenges. Take that 5 or 6 months to figure out what you're going to do, then it's another year plus to do it. So it takes a while to take 104 Air Force bases and start it, and we try to do as many as we can in parallel. But there's budget drives how many you can do, and just the number of people you can contract for to do the work. So we don't expect to finish modernizing all those 104 bases for about another 5 years. And we're already starting to go back to the bases that we did several years ago and modernize those. That's the challenge. The other things that we're doing at those locations, though, are security at the endpoint. So if you can see, be careful when I press here. I don't want to press it, it doesn't work. There we go. So if you can see, there's host-based security. So we are doing some McAfee products there. I'll go ahead and touch you a little bit. I can say that because it wasn't our choice. DISA mandated that we use those tools, and we employ them. Here's another example of where the challenges occur in securing a network. DISA said, we've selected the tool that's going to protect all of your laptops and your PCs. We made it easy. We bought it, we've already tested it, all you have to do is deploy it. Well, $30 million and about 4 years and counting later, we're about where they wanted us to be. You'll see on this slide, JTF-GNO, it's now called U.S. Cyber Command, Joint Task Force Global Network Operations, what it was called before. They issued an order to all of the services, and they said, you will install this intrusion prevention system. And you'll do it in 90 days, or else. 4 years. Because they had no concept for how complex the network was and what the challenges were in terms of, you talked about the beauty of Stuxnet and how it worked all the way back to Windows 95. These tools didn't. They didn't expect to have to. They weren't designed to. Who would expect that? But they had to. And we ran into those critical problems. They were designed with an expectation of a number of users and how those users were dispersed. Not so in our network. They had to buy additional servers, collection servers and whatnot to roll up data. So $30 million later, supposedly free, we bought it for you, go deploy it, technology to secure your endpoint. Another one that's on here, data at rest. 4 or 5 years ago, the government came out with a blanket purchase agreement for data at rest technologies. About 7 or 8 companies came out on that. And it was, so if you were going to do data at rest, and you must do data at rest, again, there was another order, this is what you must use. We're not there yet. Haven't even begun, amazingly enough. For a variety of reasons that I won't waste the rest of this hour talking about. But nonetheless, it's still a challenge that lays ahead of us. You might think, oh my gosh, the VA had those 50,000 laptops, people that were compromising the laptop. The Air Force has had information lost off of the laptops. How can you not have done that? And all I can say is there are limited tax dollars out there, and there are priorities, and there are challenges with deploying this technology. They may be somewhat successfully, so I say somewhat successfully deployed some of this technology a year or so ago to the Navy Marine Corps Internet. But I will tell you, there's a whole lot of what you'll hear and what's fact, okay? Because when you think about data at rest, you think about file encryption, but you also think about disk encryption, okay? But you also think about peripherals, right? Well, they didn't go that whole route. And one of the reasons we didn't get to data at rest successfully when we thought we could have is we sat down and looked at the problem again, and we couldn't get there. So then we finally wised up and said, well, since we can't get there, since you can't get to that effectively and keep your mission going, file and full disk encryption and with all the peripherals, we're going to attack it piecemeal. So as I left the door, as I walked out the door, we were putting a contract together to at least put file and disk encryption on laptops, at least the things that leave the office. Okay, so at least we can get those if we lose them. At least there's one, that first level of effectiveness. But my only point is that when you start looking at security, and you start looking at something that's in a little knothole of it, like data sitting on a hard drive, and you think to myself, how am I going to protect that data? The problem becomes complex very quickly, and it's true at every step of the way. So that's the base level security. I'll move to the network control center at each of the bases, and again, here you have a DMZ. You have a set of routers and switches. You have your firewalls and your proxies, etc., in your DMZ and your intrusion prevention devices. At those locations, there are plus you have all of your DNS, and you have your Active Directory, and you have your mail relays, and it just goes on and on. And you step back and you look at all these racks of equipment, and all those racks of equipment need to be protected as well. So another program that we have still ongoing, it's still not complete. See if I can find it. Vulnerability and scanning remediation. This is another one I walked into 2 years ago. I walked into a program called Vulnerability Lifecycle Management. And again, here's another case where DISA had said, here's a bunch of tools you're going to use, okay? Go deploy them. And we still have not fully deployed them. That was several years ago. What's so hard about it? Well, there were a lot of things that were hard about it. They weren't all just the tools. I'll just give you a little brief rundown. When I walked into my position I just left, when I walked in there was a program funded to deploy this capability. This capability essentially is a way to maintain your patching configurations on all your network servers, all your network devices, right? That sounds like a great thing to do. We had bought all the equipment, this is several years ago. We had positioned all the equipment out to all the Air Force bases that needed to, at our command and control layers. It was all sitting there ready to go. We had turned it on at a subset of bases, and it was being used. But the operators didn't understand it well enough, so they turned it off. And then the command and control element said, we don't like it. We like our little homegrown tool that we purchased from Joe's software shop. We're going to keep using that because we're comfortable with it. So I rolled in and I brought all the leadership in and I said, this is it. We're either going to just throw this all away, which we were mandated to do, or you'll commit to it. And they said, fine, we'll commit to it. And we started finishing the deployment. And we finally got to operationally testing this. Is it ready to go and fully field and be used by the Air Force? Failed. Why did it fail? Because the customer didn't understand it, didn't like it, didn't commit to it. So we sit here today with a system that is deployed to 20% of the Air Force, okay, that has got to go through a retest, has got to have an additional investment put into it in order to finish deploying something that's supposed to keep all our patches up to date on all of our servers. And then they were trying to push 6 years of patches to one device. And then complaining why wasn't it working? It's just hanging, it's just sitting there. We had it running all night. So securing a network is not easy. All right, so that's at the base network control center. I'll touch briefly on the command and control layers before I get to moving on here. But like everybody, we have a network operations center, we have security operations centers, and that's what these two bubbles represent. You have to roll everything up. Okay, so if you employ a remediation tool, it's got to roll up to command and control level, otherwise you can't control your policies. So that's what those entities are for. Same thing goes with the intrusion prevention at the endpoints. DISA and JTFGNO, now US Cyber Command, said, hey, thanks for deploying all that technology, but we want to see everything. We want to be able to drill down to every one of those endpoints and see what's been happening. These aren't simple things. This requires data to be moved a long way through the network. And I got embroiled in a challenge that went to very high levels in the DoD, where we were getting yelled at and threatened. There was threats from US Cyber Command to turn off your first network. But that's where these threats. That's how high these threats were going, because that intrusion prevention system at the desktop level, we hadn't gotten far enough along. What they wanted to do is they wanted to see a little. They were looking at stoplights every day for all the services, little green, yellows, and reds, and they were seeing reds for the Air Force, and that was making them unhappy. Now, we were further ahead than all the other services in actually deploying an effective tool that you would use to protect an endpoint. But the other services had gained the system, they had a little green in life. So they weren't getting yelled at, but we were getting yelled at. And so I had to get involved, and we had to scramble, change the contract, and alter the deployment so that they could get a little flashing green light and US Cyber. Didn't change a bit about the security posture of the network. In fact, it set us behind about 3 or 4 weeks, but it made them happy. Because to us, the important thing was, are we stopping attacks? And to them, the important thing was, are we making somebody above us happy that there's green lights and that people deploy the piece of software? And that's not what we were concerned about. But anyway, that reporting all has to happen up here at this level. So what I want to switch gears to now and focus on a little more is these Air Force gateways, because this Air Force VPN intranet isn't possible, doesn't exist without the gateways. So I talked about those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of access points into the network. We wanted to reduce them down to 16. And today, that's what we have. We have 16 entry and exit points into the Air Force intranet, all fully functioning, with all the bases behind us. And I'll kind of steal on my own thunder a little bit here, but probably one of the few things that we did in my 2 years that everyone said, we love this, thank you for doing it. So we're pretty proud of it, but it was a very difficult road, and I think the reason that Dr. Booth wanted me to come here today was because of how difficult that road was, but it was a successful one. You were here, sir, well before I encountered the challenges. But again, walking in the door to a program that had bought all the equipment, deployed all the equipment, expected to be up and running several years ago, only to find itself ground to a halt, and now how do we move forward? It was a very frustrating challenge, but finally, the right changes happened in the Air Force, right leadership changes happened in the Air Force to allow us to move forward, and I'll talk about the successes there. But again, 16 gateways into the Air Force network, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in the next slide. Okay. So this just kind of gives you a little bit just of a depiction of, again, we're in the theater defense ring with the Air Force gateway, 16 perimeters. I want to give you a feel for the life cycle cost. $1.2 billion to do this. $1.2 billion to take a network with multiple attack point vectors, avenues, down to 16. This stuff is not cheap. Securing the network is not cheap. This concept, just to give you a little aside here, this concept came out about 7-8 years ago to do this. I remember I talked about all those company divisions, those MAJCOMs. The concept was every one of those MAJCOMs was going to have their own gateway. That was the original concept. So there was still going to be a bunch of different networks out there. They just were going to have their own gateway. Finally, somebody wised up and said, no. One Air Force, and we'll have 16 access points. And they broke apart all the MAJCOM and said, your bases aren't going to go necessarily through the same gateway. So we're going to take your power away from you, your authority, and we're going to think about this from the Air Force standpoint, and that works. But the internet itself requires not just those gateways, but the service delivery point routers at every base. Otherwise, you don't get that VPN. But that's the $1.2 billion. In about 2007, the plans were changed. A little bit before 2007, the plans were changed. 16 gateway concept came out, and they were deployed at one of those company divisions called Pacific Air Forces. So it was one of the smaller commands. We thought we'll try it out there, see if it works. By 2008, it was fully up and running. And Pacific Air Command, Air Forces, PACAF, as I would call them, said, we love this. This is awesome. It was knocking down all this spam. It's allowing us to focus and do forensics and see where the real threats are. We're having red teams come in. They're not getting in like they used to get in. We love it. We want more of this. And that was 2008. It's 2011. Finally, 3 years later, all of the rest of the Air Force is underneath this network. Hello. Too much technology in my hands. Where are they located and how are they set up? So the idea is you have to understand the Air Force setup a little bit. Again, those MAJCOMs, some of them are geographic, some of them are mission-oriented. The geographic MAJCOMs, PACAF, as I said, which handles the Asian area. These are the ones that were set up in 2008, Osan, Yokota, and Hickam Air Force bases. Those have been operating and effectively running for 3 years now. USAFE, U.S. Air Forces in Europe, those are now up and running. The rest of the MAJCOMs are supported by the remaining gateways in the continental U.S., located geographically dispersed. Now, every base is assigned a primary gateway for its traffic and an alternate gateway. Primary gateway that goes down, automatic failover to the secondary gateway. We have an integrated management system, so you can do security management, fault management, et cetera, for that. And those IMSs dupe to each other as well. So it's a fairly robust concept, but not without its challenges, and I'll get to those in a second. Basic architecture, again, I talked about having to have that service delivery point to the gateways. And in the gateways, again, I'll show a little more detailed view of this, but essentially, again, another DMZ that we set up. This is the overall gateway design. I'll spend a couple minutes here. I want to, again, get back to the previous discussion because I kept thinking about this. All through Emil's talk, I was thinking about the Air Force network as you were talking about all these challenges. And I'm going, my gosh, everything that we do almost is centered around security, it seems like. When you look at this architecture, it's not really, you don't initially think about operating the network. You think about security network. What are the mail relays there for? Well, they're so you can get mail. No, not really. They're there to knock down all the incredible amount of spam that's out there so we can do our job. I mean, it's just a different way of thinking about things. The proxies that are there, what are they there doing? The same thing. They're handling the Web 2.0, right? So all of the devices are on there. IPS is on here. There are then there's the network forensics, the packet capture and inspection tools that are on there. It's just a tremendous amount of investment in this for security. It's really fascinating to me. You talked about some of the Web 2.0, the growth, and you should also talk about the growth and the use of the network. Remember I said this was architected back in about 2003, fielded in about 2008, finally fully deployed in 2011. Do you think that architecture is effective today as it was when it was designed? No. I mean, there are a tremendous number of concerns here. One of the first things that happened is, what concerned us was the Air Force CIO said, thou shalt open the Air Force network to Web 2.0, Facebook, Twitter, etc. It had been closed off. It got opened up, but with no policies. It was just, it's okay to use it. So the day it was opened up, the first trouble ticket that came in from a young airman who said, my Facebook page went down because you helped me rebuild it. That was the trouble ticket to an Air Force help desk the day we opened up to Web 2.0. So those of us that were in the business were very concerned about that, just opened it up without any policy on it. And we've been trying to open the eyes of leadership, saying you don't understand what the impact this has on the network. How much traffic now is going through the proxies. The proxies weren't designed to handle the amount of traffic that's going through. That's not what they were there for. So we had to modernize these proxies. We had to add additional proxies here. So the security growth in the network too, the amount of encryption that goes on, has also done things to our mail relays. They were no longer robust enough to handle the problem. So these are the kinds of challenges that pop up. So here we are with the architecture, fairly successful. The Air Force loves it, but we've got a ways to go yet. $1.2 billion life cycle costs. I didn't know that bill, sorry. And where are we going? So fully operational, yay, big celebration. We went through operational test and evaluation. Fully operationally suitable and effective. Now you may look at that and go, if you're not in the federal space, and go, big deal. If you are spending $1 billion and you want to continue to spend money and use a system, if you don't get that, you don't get to. So it was a huge milestone to be operationally suitable and effective. That said, that design worked. Even though it was back in 2003, even though it has challenges, and I'll talk about those in a minute, it worked. And so the Air Force is absolutely ecstatic. One of those major commands, Air Force Space Command, was put in charge of all of the Air Force's cyber mission. And they pounded the door of the Pentagon saying, please let us go faster. We must get this deployed because of what it was doing for them to identify the threats. But here's where we sit today. Extensive modernization. Pretty much the entire gateway architecture, that whole chart I showed you, is being replaced because it can't handle the workload that it was designed for. We did an Air Force sizing study just recently to try to get an estimation of what it was going to take, how much equipment, what size of equipment we're going to put in place to handle today's workload and go forward. But I can tell you it's in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars we're going to spend over the next couple of years to modernize what we just fielded. It's expensive to secure a network. I talked about the Web 2.0 impacts and just the long acquisition deployment timelines. These things just don't happen quickly enough, right? It starts with Congress and giving us the money, okay? And it's getting all the money you ask for. And what happens is they give you the money you ask for, and then the money gets taken away, so you can only do part of the job. And then you say, well, since we can only do part of the job, I couldn't do it the way I wanted to do it, so now I've got to do it over again sooner. And it's just a spiral that you get into. And the life cycle of IT products does not support that kind of fiscal approach. It just doesn't. It's a failed model. There are a lot of activities going on within DoD right now from the Pentagon to try to change, to do things specifically differently for IT. None of them have come to fruition yet. None of them gained any traction. So that's a lot of good news, but where are we going next? And again, this kind of gets back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier and some of the things I'm looking forward to hearing this afternoon. So this is kind of, these were, I'll claim ownership, these were kind of my 4 Cs, but there's nothing, unique or clever about them. But from an Air Force standpoint, they're kind of significant because they're a big departure from the way we were doing business. I've been pushing very hard I get that past tense, pushing very hard on commoditizing infrastructure. I'll give you a couple examples. We had routers at every one of our bases, 2, an external and internal router around our DMZs that had to be replaced. The incumbent vendor gave us a quote to replace those routers, and the quote was $27 million to do that across the Air Force. So I went and did a different approach, and I competed, and I did it under an approach called lowest price, technically acceptable. So we wrote a set of requirements, and we said anybody that can meet that set of requirements for our router can bid and win. We paid $9 million for those routers.
When do you think about this?
I'm sorry?
When do you think about this?
They're being replaced right now.
Yeah.
Right now they're being replaced.
For scaling up? Scaling up the infrastructure?
Yes.
What do you need?
Oh, so first of all, the existing routers are about 7 years old. They were no longer supportable, so we couldn't secure them anymore. Secondly, they couldn't handle the workload of the Air Force intranet. The traffic load was too much for the previous routers. So those are the 2 reasons we had to replace those. That's just one example of what commoditizing will do for you. I'm a big believer. Now there are security implications to this, right? Now, on the one hand, if you lock yourself into a single vendor, then you can focus on securing the supply chain from beginning to end, and that you might feel good about that. On the other hand, now you're vulnerable to that one single entry point that can be studied and well understood and attacked down the road. If you commoditize, who knows? You may have one vendor's product one day, and the next day you may have another vendor's product. So I kind of see security advantages in that approach. Converged hardware and software services. This is one that I was really pounding my head against the table a lot, especially as I brought in industry and talked to them about the capabilities of their products. Here's how it goes. This is my vignette, if you will. Company comes out and says, I can solve a new problem on the network that everybody's having. And if you buy our device, you'll solve that problem. And people go, yeah, you're right, I do have that problem, and I don't know anything else that will solve it. And everybody starts buying it, right? And that company starts making a lot of money buying that, selling that product. But then competitors come in right behind them, and they go, I can do that too, right? And they do it with their existing technology. They've got a device that's already out there, and they say, well, I can just modify this device, and now I can do what that person can do. You don't need to buy theirs anymore. Well, the person that made all the money off of selling this new capability, they go, well, gosh, I'm having trouble competing now. I guess I'm going to start copying everybody else's capabilities. And so this one box that did one thing now does 5 things. And the box that you already owned that did 3 things now does that thing plus another. So now I come along the normal 3, 4, 5, 6 year life cycle for IT, and I've got to replace the device. What was happening was we go, here's a device that does a unique function on the network. Let's go buy a new one because this old can't be supported anymore. No, stop. Maybe we've already got a device on the network that does that. We just aren't using it. And that's exactly what happens. You buy devices that are multi-purpose, you buy them for a specific use, proxy, a firewall, a router. I want it to do one thing. But then you look a little deeper and go, well gosh, it does 10 other things I didn't pay for. But if I just pay for that little piece, instead of paying for a whole new box that I've got to maintain and support, that's what I mean by converged hardware and software services. And you're starting to see that happen on its own, just because you're starting to see firewalls and whatnot being able to be software based and put on a server, and you don't need a specific box for it. And so these next gen firewalls, as they call them, are a step in that direction. But these are the kinds of things the CIO's got to think about when you start spending the kind of money that I'm talking about, and when you have challenges like I showed you in the slide with the non-infrastructure as well. So converged hardware and software services is something that has got to be stopped and thought about before you make another investment. Consolidated data centers, we've all been there. I went to the HP had a specific day they would host. Spent a whole day with them to find out how they took their 80 some odd data centers down to 3. Great story. They were very, very, very successful. Recouped their investment in a year or 2. Wish we could do it that way in the government. But we just don't have the wherewithal. They don't have that single command chain that controls all the money that can say, these are the rules, now you're going to play by them. But we still are doing it. And a lot of the consolidation is happening via virtualization, which brings its own security challenges. And then private clouds. Here's the one that I think is the one that's got the most interest in the future. A lot of challenging questions to be asked from a government standpoint, from a military standpoint. I put private clouds on there because I don't know how we get to public clouds yet. I just don't know how we do it. I think there's a possibility of doing it. I think there are limited cases where it can be done. I won't use global threat intelligence as an example, but we have talked a lot about that in the Air Force. How do we embrace a concept like that to keep the Air Force secure so that everybody doesn't know what we're specifically worried about in the Air Force? These are challenges. So we lean a little bit more towards the private cloud concept right now, okay? But we really aren't even doing private clouds the way we should be doing. There are so many opportunities out there to lease a data center, okay? It already exists. Maybe the DoD owns, but it's being, through a public-private partnership, operated by a contractor. That needs to happen, but we need to figure out how to secure that, how to do that in a secure fashion. I think I've got one more here. So the way ahead, and I heard this, again, a lot of great points. I just could have said, rump, a lot of the points you make. But at the end of the day, budget pressures are what are driving this, okay? I talked about David Kundra's IT efficiencies. Each of the services is under pressure to be more efficient with their IT budget. Here's how it works with your taxpayer dollars. Okay, if your taxpayer dollars, what happens is the Air Force will say, we need to be more efficient with our IT. So we're going to take 25% of your IT dollars, now go be more efficient. Not the other way around. You don't get to invest in your efficiency. You just get your money taken away and told to be more efficient. Hopefully you get how difficult that is with the challenges I just raised. So those budget pressures are going to increase. And what it's going to do, I'm going to get back to the DISA question, is it's going to start driving solutions up the stack. So instead of the direction the Air Force has been going, which is we'll cocoon ourselves in layers, those are going to be stripped away, and we're going to be told to trust. And we're going to have to trust higher because it's cheaper, because it's affordable to trust higher. Okay? So that's what you're going to see happening. But what I also see as a continuing shortfall that I work very, very hard to try to correct in my time in the program office is the increase in partnerships with industry in many, many, many ways. Okay, and what was happening was too much, and you may see this in some of the other services that you deal with if you're on the sales side in the room, but you see too much of, okay, first thing I know about what you need is something comes out on Fed BizOps. Well, that's not a good model, okay? Because the timelines we give you to respond to, say, an RFI are short. You don't get a chance to really think about it, understand what the customer really needs, and then it come out with an RFP and you're scrambling to win the business. What really needs to happen is an ongoing collaboration, and which is what I was trying to push. An early and often collaboration. Come into the program offices of the Air Force. Okay? Sit down with the folks that are spending $500 million a year. What are their challenges? What does the network look like? I showed you a little bit of that today. Go deeper with them. Offer your products into their laboratories and say, test them out, try them out, see what you like and what you don't like. Okay? What you want to do is you want to influence requirements. Okay, this is a win-win proposition here. Okay? So if you embrace a long-term partnership with the government side, and it has to be a long-term partnership, and I'll tell you why in a second. It has to be a long-term partnership. If you embrace that partnership, you're going to win because you're going to influence the way we write our requirements. Because we're going to have seen your equipment, we're going to have seen the capital investments you've been doing, we're going to like some things, and we're going to write our requirements. Whatever I put in here, I want to be able to do this because I like it. If we don't know about it, it won't go in there. I'll give you the router example. I thought that was a pretty successful approach, and I got a lot of congratulations over the cost savings there. But we learned a lot of lessons, though. I wouldn't do it the same way again. Not everything can be done under a lowest price technically acceptable approach. Okay? You can miss a lot of capability vendors put into their products with that approach. So listen carefully to what I'm saying if you want to do business with the government. This is kind of a little bit of preaching here. What I'm saying is that there probably is going to be more LPTA type activities. We're going to commoditize them. That doesn't mean that your capital investments in your product will go unnoticed or unrewarded. What it means is you've got to work a little harder for the government to know what they are. So when they write that technically acceptable set of requirements, what you've worked so hard to separate yourself from the pack line is in it. Okay? Now the government needs to be willing to have that collaboration, but I will tell you the program office I left was very willing. We were putting things in the laboratory, we were doing analysis, we were doing studies and comparisons, and we were changing the way we were writing requirements. The last little soapbox thing I'll have to say, and then I'll finish up. Industry really has to help the government operationalize what they feel. Okay? So I can't speak for the private customers that industry sells to, but I think the challenge is somewhat similar, but they approach it a little differently. The users of the equipment on the Air Force side and the DoD side in general are not highly trained, and they're very transient. Okay? A young person, 18, 19, 20 years old, gets sat down in front of these tools that we've deployed, in front of the interface to it. Okay? And there's a little bit of training, a few months of training, and said, defend the network. Your job's that firewall. Make sure the policies are enforced in that firewall. Has anybody ever, in this room, who has tried to configure policies on the firewall? All right, so good, all right. I haven't actually had to do it. I've only been yelled at for how hard it is. So, would anybody disagree that it's an incredibly difficult challenge to configure policies on the firewall? This is the environment we're in right now. So what you find is, if you don't pay somebody else to do it for you, which the Air Force isn't willing to do right now, but I think they should, but they aren't willing to do right now. You've got a very complex piece of equipment to operate with somebody not trained well enough to do it. I'll just give you some stuff there that, there's a lot I can't tell you in this room, unfortunately, but I will tell you that a commander of one of these facilities came to me and said, I got a list of problems. I said, tell me all of them. And he said, here's one of the problems I got. We had to go find a piece of software that could decode the policies on this firewall so we could understand them. And when we did that, we found out scary things. Like, we had a policy that said, allow all, no offense here, anybody in the room, allow all Israel traffic to come through the firewall. It had .Israel, it's allowed through. On a firewall as a policy. Didn't even know it, because there were so many layers of policies, I had no idea. And that may not be a big deal, but it just gives you an example of how complex it is, and how if you don't really know, you got a door sitting wide open. What's the point of having a firewall if you got all the doors open in the firewall? What's the point of these security glasses? So help us operationalize field and systems. I put squeeze the rock on there. It all kind of comes together, right? I mean, the devices are feature rich, right? So they can do more than they could do yesterday. We don't know that. We don't understand it. We bought 50 pieces of capability. We're using 10 because that's all we understand. Help us understand the other 40. Okay, take the time to educate. You know, I'm not picking, although don't get me wrong, I'm not picking. But you're right there, and you're making me think of things that have happened. When I went to Focus 10, I asked the CEO this very question, and he and I sat down and talked a couple of times. And I said, I'm very, very impressed with where McAfee's going. But I said, now that you are so deeply embedded vertically on our network, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to be a hardware provider, or are you going to provide service to us as well? Because, again, he's iron unless you use it properly. So help us operationalize the system. Okay, I think that is it. Yep. So again, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a drive-by tour of where the Air Force is going from a security standpoint, how they think about security. I would love to have dived deep into a lot of these topics, but another time. And if there's any questions specifically about the Air Force network and where we're headed and what we're doing, please fire away. Oh, sir, yes.